My name is Charla. I'm 29 years old, and I bought my first home with every cent I ever saved. It wasn't just a house, it was my sanctuary, my proof that I had made it. But that sanctuary became a battlefield the night my own family tried to burn it down with me inside. I was in my living room at 2 in the morning, a familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach when I heard it. A faint metallic click from the back door, a sound so out of place in the quiet suburbs that it sent a jolt of pure ice through my veins. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was the deliberate, calculated sound of someone trying to pick the lock. My blood ran cold. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that this was not a random burglar. A random burglar wouldn't know about the faulty latch on the old kitchen window. A random burglar wouldn't move with such quiet, purposeful steps. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Then came the sound of glass, shattering, a sharp, violent crack that ripped through the silence of the night. A deep, familiar male voice, roughened with whiskey and determination, whispered, "She's in there. Get the door." My world tilted. I knew that voice. It was my father's. And then another voice, the one that had sung me lullabies and bandaged my scraped knees. My mother's replied in a strained whisper, "Make it fast. I can't watch this." The back door splintered open with a deafening crash, the wood frame splintering like brittle bone. Silhouetted in the doorway against the pale moonlight were 3 figures. My father, his broad shoulders slumped with a grim purpose. My brother-in-law, Mark, his face a mask of cold fury. And my Uncle Dave, my father's younger brother, his eyes darting nervously. In my father's hands was not a weapon, but a bright red gasoline can, the sloshing liquid inside a terrifying promise. My brother-in-law was holding a baseball bat, its wooden surface gleaming dully. But the last person I expected to see, the one who broke my heart into 1,000 pieces, was my sister Melanie. She was standing behind them, her face a mask of tearful resolve, her eyes locked on mine with an expression that wasn't remorse, but a chilling, righteous determination. Charla's world shattered into 1,000,000 irreparable pieces. Before we dive into this nightmare, I want to ask, where are you watching from today? It's stories like these that remind us how connected we all are, no matter where we are in the world. If this is your first time here, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. It helps more than you know, and you won't want to miss the incredible twists and turns this story takes. Now let's go back to the beginning, to the moment this house, my beautiful house, became the center of my universe. To understand why my own family would become my tormentors, you have to understand what this house meant to me. It wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was the physical manifestation of a decade of my life, a testament to my unwavering belief that I could build something for myself, something that was mine and mine alone. For 10 long years, I worked 2 jobs. By day, I was a dedicated administrative assistant at a small but reputable law firm, a job I was good at, a job that gave me a sense of stability. By night, I was a bartender at a noisy downtown pub, slinging drinks and listening to the stories of strangers, saving every single tip I could. I sacrificed vacations. I drove a car that was held together by rust and prayer. I lived in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment that always smelled faintly of whatever my neighbor was cooking. But every time I deposited a check into my savings account, I wasn't just saving money. I was saving pieces of my future, building a fortress against the uncertainty that had defined my childhood. The day I got the keys to this house, a modest but charming 2-story craftsman with a small overgrown backyard, was the proudest day of my life. I remember standing in the empty living room, the afternoon sun streaming through the dusty windows, and crying. They were tears of joy, of relief, of pure, unadulterated triumph. I had done it, all by myself. The smell of the fresh paint, I chose a calming seafoam green for the kitchen, the feel of the new hardwood floors under my feet, the way the morning light filled the master bedroom, it was all a symphony of my own making. This house was my sanctuary, my proof that I had made it, that I was safe, that I was finally in control of my own destiny. To understand the betrayal, you also have to understand my family. We were the picture of a normal, middle-class American family, at least on the surface. My father, Richard, was a charismatic man, a natural leader who always carried himself with an air of quiet authority. He was a proud man, but also a financially reckless one. He believed in living for the moment, in projecting an image of success, even if the reality was far more precarious. He had always favored my older sister, Melanie. Melanie was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. She was beautiful, outgoing, and effortlessly charming, the apple of my father's eye. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who was always expected to be sensible, to be the backbone, to clean up the messes. My mother, Eleanor, was the family peacemaker. Her entire existence seemed to revolve around maintaining a fragile sense of harmony, a goal she pursued by sweeping every conflict, every uncomfortable truth under a thick, lumpy rug of denial. She would rather ignore a festering wound than risk the discomfort of cleaning it out. Then there was Uncle Dave, my father's younger brother, a man who had always lived in my father's shadow, a follower who was easily swayed by my father's strong personality. And finally, there was Melanie and her husband, Mark. Mark was a smooth talker, a salesman with a 1,000-watt smile and an even bigger ambition. He and Melanie were a power couple, always chasing the next big thing, always living on the edge of their means. I remember family gatherings, the air thick with the scent of my mother's roast and the sound of my father's booming laughter. Melanie would be holding court, telling stories about her latest vacation or her new designer handbag, while my father would look on with a beaming, proud expression. I would usually be in the kitchen, helping my mother, listening to her gossip about the neighbors, a quiet observer in the drama of my own family. The first cracks in this carefully constructed facade started to appear about a year before the night they broke in. Melanie and Mark's lifestyle started to escalate, becoming more and more extravagant. A brand new luxury SUV appeared in their driveway, replacing their perfectly practical sedan. They started posting pictures of exotic vacations on social media, lounging on pristine beaches in front of overwater bungalows. Mark started making passive-aggressive comments about my good fortune whenever I saw him. "Must be nice, Charla," he'd say with a tight smile, "to have your house all paid off. Some of us weren't so lucky." The comments were designed to sting, to imply that my success was a matter of luck, not the years of back-breaking work I had put in. I noticed the changes, of course, but I said nothing. I didn't want to cause conflict. I didn't want to be the jealous sister. So I smiled, nodded, and kept my suspicions to myself. I had no idea that their lavish lifestyle was a house of cards built on a foundation of debt and deceit. The first time Melanie asked me for money, it was for a small loan of $5,000. She sat at my kitchen table crying, telling me a sob story about a sudden, unexpected expense that Mark's business couldn't cover. She promised they would pay me back in a month. I was wary. I knew their spending was out of control. But she was my sister. She was crying. And a part of me, the part that had been conditioned my entire life to be the responsible one, to be the one who fixes things, felt a pang of obligation. I gave her the money. I made it clear as firmly as I could that it was a one-time thing, that I couldn't afford to be their bank. I didn't realize then that I had just shown them a weakness, a crack in my armor that they would later exploit with a devastating precision. That $5,000 was just a test, a small down payment on the much larger price they would soon demand I pay. The months after I gave Melanie that $5,000 were a strange, unsettling time. The money was never paid back, of course. Melanie mentioned it once, saying they were still a little tight, and I, not wanting to create a scene, let it drop. It was a small amount in the grand scheme of things, but it felt like a betrayal, a small chip in the foundation of our sisterly bond. I started to distance myself emotionally, a quiet act of self-preservation. I focused on my work, on my home, on building a life that was separate from the drama of my family. I thought I could build a wall, a safe space that they couldn't penetrate. I was wrong. The real storm was gathering, and I was blissfully unaware of the hurricane that was about to make landfall. The catalyst for the disaster was a family dinner at my parents' house. I should have known something was wrong the moment I walked in. The air was thick with a tension so palpable you could almost taste it. My mother was bustling around the kitchen, her movements jerky and anxious. My father was sitting in his recliner, staring at the television, but not really watching it, his jaw clenched tight. Melanie and Mark were already there, sitting on the couch, but they weren't talking. Mark was staring at his phone, his face pale and drawn. Melanie was picking at her nails, a nervous habit she had when she was lying. The dinner itself was a silent, awkward affair. The only sounds were the clinking of silverware against plates, and my mother's forced, cheerful attempts at conversation. "Isn't this roast lovely, Charla? I got it at that new butcher shop." I nodded, my appetite gone. I could feel the unspoken words hanging in the air, a dark cloud of secrets and unspoken fears. After dinner, when the dishes were cleared and my mother had poured us all coffee, my father finally broke the silence. He put his mug down with a heavy thud and looked at me, his eyes devoid of their usual warmth. "Charla," he began, his voice low and serious, "we have something we need to discuss." What followed was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Mark, with my father's prompting, finally broke down and told the truth. His business, a high-end consulting firm he had started a few years ago, had collapsed. It wasn't just a simple failure, he explained, his voice cracking with feigned emotion. It was a catastrophic one. He had made a single terrible investment, a deal that had gone spectacularly wrong, and now he was being sued by a former business partner for breach of contract. The total amount of his debt, he claimed, was over $1 million. $1 million. The number hung in the air, so large, so absurd, that it felt unreal. He was facing bankruptcy, he said, and potential legal charges that could land him in prison. Melanie, of course, played her part to perfection. She started to cry, big theatrical tears rolling down her cheeks. "We're going to lose everything! Charla," she sobbed. "The house, the cars, everything. Mark could go to jail. I don't know what we're going to do." It was a performance worthy of an Oscar, and I watched it all with a growing sense of dread. Then came the moment that changed everything. My father, taking charge as he always did, laid out their solution. It wasn't a request, it was a demand. "There's only one way to fix this." He said, his eyes locked on mine, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You have to sell your house, Charla. You have to give us the money to pay off this debt." I was stunned. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. I couldn't breathe. I looked from my father's stern face to my mother's pleading eyes, to Melanie's tear-streaked face, to Mark's hangdog expression. They were all in on it. This was an ambush. My father started to lay on the guilt, thick and heavy. "We're blood, Charla. We're family. We help each other in times of need. That house, it's just wood and nails. It's a thing. Your brother-in-law's freedom, your sister's future. That's what's important. That's everything." My mother chimed in, her voice a soft, pleading whisper. "Please, honey, we're not asking you to be poor. You can start over, but we need you to do this. For us. For family." I refused. I told them in as calm a voice as I could muster that I would not sell my house. I explained that my house was my entire net, worth my only security, my retirement plan. I told them that $1 million was every cent I had, and that giving it to them would leave me with nothing. No home, no savings, no safety net. I offered to help them in other ways. I offered to help them find a good financial advisor, to help them find a reputable lawyer, to negotiate the debt, to help them explore their options. But I could not destroy my own future to fix a problem that they had created. That was the moment I was cast as the villain in their twisted little drama. My father's face hardened, his expression turning from stern to cold fury. "If you won't help your own family in their time of need," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "then you're no daughter of mine." My mother started to cry again, but this time her tears were tinged with a hint of anger. "How can you be so selfish, Charla? After everything we've done for you?" Melanie looked at me, and all pretense of sisterly love was gone. Her eyes were filled with a pure, cold hatred that chilled me to the bone. The line was drawn. I stood up, my legs shaking, and walked out of the house, leaving behind the wreckage of my family, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and a dawning, terrifying resolve. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that this was not the end. It was just the beginning. The month that followed that disastrous family dinner was a surreal and terrifying time. I tried to go on with my life, to pretend that nothing had happened, but the threat of their demand hung over me like a dark cloud. I went to work. I came home. I tended my garden, but I was always looking over my shoulder. Every time the phone rang, my heart would leap into my throat. Every time a car slowed down in front of my house, I would hold my breath. I was living in a state of constant low-grade anxiety, waiting for the other shoe to drop. And drop it did. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in the form of a certified letter from a law firm I had never heard of. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely tear open the envelope. Inside was a thick stack of legal documents. It was a lawsuit. My parents, Richard and Eleanor, and my sister Melanie were suing me. The accusations were so outrageous, so completely fabricated, that I had to read them twice to believe they were real. They claimed that I owed them over $50,000 for years of financial support they had allegedly provided to me. They claimed that I had verbally promised to give them the money for the down payment on my house, a promise they conveniently had no evidence of. The lawsuit was a sham, a frivolous, malicious attempt to drain my financial resources and force me to sell my house. But it was also a brilliant, if evil, strategy. Even if they couldn't win, they could bleed me dry with legal fees. This was a cold, calculated, and deeply personal assault on my financial stability. I felt a wave of despair so profound that I almost collapsed. I was all alone. I didn't have a husband or a partner to turn to. My friends were supportive, but they couldn't help me with a legal battle of this magnitude. I was facing my own family, and they were playing for keeps. But in that moment of despair, a flicker of anger ignited inside me. It was a small, defiant flame, but it was enough to push me out of my despair and into action. I wasn't going to let them destroy me without a fight. I needed a lawyer, and not just any lawyer. I needed a shark. I spent the next day calling every law firm in the city, explaining my situation in hushed, urgent tones. Most of them were sympathetic, but hesitant. Family law was messy, and they didn't want to get involved in a he said, she said battle with so much emotional baggage. Finally, I found her. Her name was Sarah, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer who came highly recommended by a colleague at my firm. I met with her in her downtown office, a sleek, modern space with a view of the city skyline. I laid out the whole sordid story from the $5,000 loan to the $1 million demand to the lawsuit. She listened intently, her expression unreadable, her fingers steepled under her chin. When I was finished, she didn't offer me sympathy. She offered me a strategy. "This isn't about money," she said, her voice cool and analytical. "This is about control. They're trying to bleed you dry so you have no choice but to settle. They're trying to break you, Charla, and we are not going to let them." Sarah was my first true ally in this war, a fierce, intelligent warrior who saw through my family's manipulative tactics and was ready to fight back. But the legal battle was just one front in the war they had declared on me. While Sarah was busy filing motions and preparing for a legal fight, my family launched a second, more insidious attack, a smear campaign designed to isolate me and turn me into a pariah. My mother became the ringleader of this campaign of emotional terrorism. She started calling our relatives, our old family friends, anyone who would listen. She would cry on the phone, weaving a tale of woe and betrayal in which I was the villain. She would tell them how selfish and heartless I was, how I was refusing to help my desperate family, how I had turned my back on my own flesh and blood. She was a master of manipulation, preying on their sense of loyalty and their fear of being caught in the crossfire. The results were devastating. I started getting text messages from cousins I had been close to my whole life. "I can't believe you would do this to your own family, Charla. Your mom is heartbroken. How could you be so cruel?" I was blocked on social media by aunts and uncles who had sent me birthday cards every year for as long as I could remember. I was an outcast, a modern-day Hester Prynne branded with a scarlet letter of S for selfish. This was betrayal, the systematic and calculated alienation of my extended family, a painful and isolating experience that left me feeling completely and utterly alone. As if the legal and social attacks weren't enough, the threats started to become more direct and more menacing. Mark began leaving me threatening voicemails, his voice a low, guttural growl. "You think a piece of paper can stop me, Charla? You think your fancy lawyer can protect you? That house is our money. You'll regret this. I promise you that." The threats were vague but chilling, and they fed my already heightened state of anxiety. I was afraid to be in my own home alone. Every creak of the floorboards, every whistle of the wind sent a jolt of fear through me. I installed a top-of-the-line security system with cameras covering every angle of my property. I changed the locks on all my doors and windows. I started carrying pepper spray in my purse. The stress was immense, a constant gnawing presence that affected my work, my sleep, and my health. I was losing weight, my hands were constantly shaking, and I was on the verge of a complete nervous breakdown. I was under attack from all sides, and I was starting to wonder if I was strong enough to survive it. The legal battle with my family was a slow, grinding war of attrition. Sarah was brilliant, systematically dismantling their baseless claims with cold, hard facts and legal precedents. But it was taking a toll. Every court appearance, every legal brief, every exchange with my family's lawyer was a reminder of the betrayal, a fresh wound on an already gaping sore. The legal fees were mounting, and even though Sarah was confident we would win, the financial strain was starting to wear on me. My family, I could tell, was getting desperate. Their lawsuit was failing, and they were running out of time and money. I should have been relieved, but I wasn't. I was scared. I knew that desperate people do desperate things, and my family was nothing if not desperate. I was right. They had a new plan, a new approach that was far more terrifying than a frivolous lawsuit. They decided to escalate their attacks from the courtroom to my own home. This was the antagonist's dangerous move, a plan born of desperation and malice, a plan to scare me into submission. The mastermind behind this new strategy was my father, but the muscle was provided by my Uncle Dave and my brother-in-law, Mark. My Uncle Dave, a man with a long and sordid history of bad decisions, had a criminal record for burglary and assault that went back decades. He was a loose cannon, a man with a violent temper and very little to lose. My father, in his infinite wisdom, decided to exploit his brother's criminal past for his own twisted ends. The plan was simple, brutal, and effective. They would break into my house in the middle of the night, terrorize me, and force me to sign over the deed to my house. They believed with a naive and dangerous certainty that if they could just scare me enough, if they could just push me to the brink of terror, I would crack. I would sign anything they put in front of me just to make it stop. The night of the invasion started out like any other night. I was exhausted both physically and emotionally. I had spent the day in a grueling deposition, being grilled by my family's lawyer, a sleazy, weaselly man who seemed to take a perverse pleasure in twisting my words and questioning my integrity. I came home, took a long, hot shower, and collapsed onto my couch, too tired to even make dinner. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by a sound that I will never forget as long as I live. It was the sound of glass shattering a sharp, violent crack that ripped through the silence of the night. It was the sound from my nightmares, the sound I had been dreading for months. My heart leaped into my throat and my blood ran cold. They were here. They were actually in my house. I didn't hesitate. I didn't scream. I didn't freeze. I acted on pure primal instinct. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table and scrambled off the couch, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. I didn't run for the front door. I knew they would be watching it. I ran for the hall closet, a small, narrow space under the stairs that I had always used for storage. I slipped inside, pulling the door closed behind me, leaving just a tiny crack to see through. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely dial 911. I whispered into the phone, my voice a choked, terrified whisper giving the dispatcher my address and a desperate plea for help. Then I huddled in the darkness, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it, and I waited. I could hear them moving through my house, their heavy footsteps echoing in the silence. They were ransacking the place, pulling drawers out of desks, knocking over lamps, their movements clumsy and destructive. "Where is she?" I heard Mark growl. "She has to be here." "Check the upstairs," my father's voice replied, calm and commanding. "She's probably hiding in her bedroom like a little coward." I could hear them on the stairs as their heavy thuds getting closer and closer. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in. Then I heard a different sound, a creak on the hardwood floor right outside the closet door. I knew I had been found. The door was flung open, and there he was. Mark, his face contorted with a mixture of rage and triumph. He reached in his hand, grabbing my arm, his grip like a vice. He dragged me out of the closet and into the living room. My father and Uncle Dave were there waiting for me. My father was holding a piece of paper and a pen. It was a deed transfer form. "Sign it, Charla," he said, his voice cold and flat, devoid of any emotion. "Sign it now." I looked from his cold, dead eyes to Mark's hateful glare, and I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that they were capable of anything. I shook my head, a silent, defiant refusal. My father nodded to Mark. "I tried to do this the easy way," he said. Mark raised the baseball bat he was holding, his arm muscles tensing. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the impact. And at that exact moment, the most beautiful sound I had ever heard filled the air. The wail of police sirens getting closer and closer. The aftermath of the home invasion was a chaotic blur of flashing lights, shouting police officers, and the sterile smell of antiseptic. I was wrapped in a rough wool blanket, sitting in the back of an ambulance, a paramedic, gently checking my blood pressure, while my father, my brother-in-law, and my Uncle Dave were led out of my house in handcuffs. The looks on their faces were a mixture of shock, anger, and dawning realization. They had been caught. They had failed. Melanie, who had been waiting in the car down the street, was also apprehended, her tearful protests of innocence falling on deaf ears. I was left in my destroyed home, surrounded by the wreckage of their violent rampage, the reality of the betrayal hitting me with the full force of a physical blow. This was attack, and it was the moment I was nearly defeated completely. The physical danger was over, but the emotional trauma was just beginning. The people who were supposed to love me, to protect me, had tried to destroy me. They had tried to kill me. The weight of that knowledge was crushing a heavy, suffocating blanket of despair that threatened to pull me under into a dark, bottomless pit of grief and rage. I couldn't stay in my house. It was no longer my sanctuary. It was a crime scene, a constant, painful reminder of the night I almost died. Sarah, my lawyer, came to the hospital where they had taken me for observation and arranged for me to stay with her for a few days. Her home was a sleek, modern apartment in a high-rise building with a doorman and a state-of-the-art security system, a fortress in the sky. It was a world away from my cozy craftsman-style house, but it was safe. For the first few days, I didn't leave the apartment. I didn't talk to anyone except Sarah. I just sat on her couch staring out the window at the city lights, a hollow, empty shell of a person. The initial shock gave way to a profound and soul-crushing grief. I mourned the loss of my family, not the family they had become, but the family I thought I had, the family I had always wanted. I mourned the loss of my innocence, my belief in the inherent goodness of people. I was a ghost haunting someone else's life, lost in a fog of pain and despair. But then slowly, something began to change. The fog started to lift, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The grief was still there, a dull, persistent ache in my chest. But it was joined by a new emotion, anger. A white-hot, righteous anger that burned away the despair and filled me with a new sense of purpose. I was done being a victim. I was done being a target. I was done crying. They wanted a war. They had wanted to burn my house down with me inside. Well, they had a war. They wanted to destroy me, I told Sarah one afternoon, my voice steady and clear for the first time in days. They wanted to take everything from me. I'm not going to let them. I'm going to fight back. Sarah looked at me, a small, approving smile playing on her lips. Good, she said. Now we're talking. My first move was to go on the offensive, but I couldn't do it alone. I needed information. I needed to know everything about my family, about their secrets, their lies, their weaknesses. I needed to find the chinks in their armor. Sarah, through her network of legal contacts, recommended a private investigator. His name was Ben, a former police detective who had started his own agency after getting tired of the bureaucracy and red tape of the force. He was a big, burly man with a gruff demeanor and a surprisingly gentle heart. We met in a crowded coffee shop, and I laid out the whole story from the $5,000 loan to the home invasion. He listened intently, his eyes narrowed, his coffee growing cold in his hands. When I was finished, he didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared at me, his expression a mixture of pity and admiration. Your family is a special kind of evil, he finally said, his voice a low growl. But they're also stupid. They left a trail, and I'm very good at finding trails. Ben became my second true ally, a grizzled, cynical warrior who had seen the worst of humanity and was not easily shocked. He was a man who believed in justice, and he saw the injustice of my situation as a personal challenge. Ben's investigation was a revelation. He was a bloodhound, sniffing out information from the most unlikely of sources. What he uncovered was a web of deceit and corruption so vast and so deep that it made my head spin. He discovered that Mark's failed investment was not a simple business deal gone wrong. It was a high-risk, illegal Ponzi scheme that he had knowingly and intentionally run, luring in investors with promises of impossibly high returns and using their money to pay off earlier investors. The $1 million debt wasn't from a lawsuit. It was the money he owed to his victims when the scheme inevitably collapsed. He was not a victim of circumstance. He was a predator, a con man who had ruined the lives of dozens of people. But that wasn't all. Ben found evidence that Melanie was not just a passive bystander in her husband's schemes. She was an active and willing participant. She had helped him lure in investors using her charm and her family's reputation to gain their trust. Some of their victims were their own elderly relatives, people who had trusted them, who had given them their life savings. Ben also discovered that my father knew about the illegal nature of Mark's business. He had helped Mark move money around, using his own accounts to hide the proceeds from the scheme. He was not just an enabler, he was an accomplice. The evidence was overwhelming, a mountain of financial records, emails, and witness statements that painted a clear and damning picture of my family's criminal enterprise. Armed with this information, Sarah and I devised a new strategy. We were not just going to defend against their frivolous lawsuit. We were going to destroy them. We were going to use their own greed and arrogance against them. We made an appointment with the district attorney, a tough, no-nonsense prosecutor who had a reputation for being relentless in her pursuit of white-collar criminals. We laid out all the evidence Ben had uncovered, a mountain of proof of Mark and Melanie's financial crimes and my father's complicity. The DA was initially skeptical, but as she pored over the documents, her expression changed from skepticism to shock and then to a cold, hard anger. This was not a simple family dispute. This was organized crime. She agreed to take the case, and she agreed to press charges. This was my first major move to attack back a bold and risky gambit that would change the course of the war forever. I was no longer just defending myself. I was on the offensive, and I was playing for keeps. The legal and public fallout from the DA's investigation was swift and brutal. The story of a family trying to force their daughter to sell her house to pay off a Ponzi scheme was too sensational, too salacious for the media to resist. It was a perfect storm of greed, betrayal, and violence, a real-life drama that captured the public's imagination. The local news was the first to pick up the story, running a segment on the evening news with a dramatic tabloid-style headline, "Family Feud Turns Criminal Daughter Forced to Flee Home After Violent Attack." The story quickly went national, picked up by online news outlets and true crime podcasts. I became a reluctant celebrity, the face of a family's dark secrets, a symbol of resilience in the face of unimaginable betrayal. My family, who had always been so concerned with their public image, was suddenly exposed as a pack of greedy, manipulative criminals. Their carefully constructed facade of respectability was shattered, replaced by a public perception of them as monsters. The DA, armed with the evidence Ben and I had provided, brought a slew of charges against Mark and Melanie. They were charged with wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering crimes that carried lengthy prison sentences. My father was also charged as an accomplice to their crimes. The weight of the evidence against them was overwhelming, a mountain of proof that left them with very few options. They were trapped, and they knew it. As the walls started to close in on them, my family became even more desperate. They tried one last desperate gambit, a final pathetic attempt to manipulate me, to pull me back into their twisted web of deceit. This was betrayal, the ultimate act of emotional manipulation, a move so cruel and so calculated that it almost broke me. It came in the form of a phone call from my mother. I hadn't spoken to her since the night of the home invasion, and I had blocked her number, but she had used a friend's phone to get through to me. Her voice was a panicked, breathless sob, a performance of pure, unadulterated panic. "Sharla? Oh, thank God I got through to you," she cried, her voice thick with fake tears. "It's your father. He's had a heart attack. He's in the hospital. The doctors, they don't think he's going to make it. You have to come, Sharla. You have to come to the hospital right now. Please, honey, don't let him die like this. He's your father." Pork. It was a brilliant evil lie, a masterclass in emotional manipulation designed to prey on my love for my father, on my sense of duty, on my guilt. She was using my father's life as a bargaining chip, a final desperate attempt to get me to drop the charges, to forgive them, to let them get away with their crimes. For a moment it worked. I felt a wave of panic, a surge of guilt and fear. What if it was true? What if my father was dying? I would never forgive myself if I didn't get to say goodbye. But then a cold, rational part of my brain kicked in. I thought about the night they broke into my house. I thought about the baseball bat, the gasoline can, the look in my father's eyes as he ordered me to sign over my house. I thought about the years of manipulation, the subtle jabs, the constant pressure to conform to be the good daughter, the one who cleaned up their messes. I thought about the $1 million they demanded, the lawsuit they filed, the lives they had ruined. And I knew it was a lie. It was just another one of their games, another one of their manipulative tactics. I didn't go to the hospital. Instead, I called Ben. I told him about my mother's call, and he agreed to check it out for me. A few hours later, he called me back. "Your father is fine, Sharla," he said, his voice grim. "He's at home. There's no record of him being admitted to any hospital in the state." It was a lie. All of it. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't even angry. I just felt a profound sense of sadness, a final, mournful acceptance of the fact that the people I had once called my family were gone, replaced by a group of greedy, manipulative strangers. This was the moment I finally broke free, not just legally, but emotionally. I was done. I was done with their lies, their manipulations, their drama. I was done with them. I didn't call my mother back. I didn't send her a message. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a response. Instead, I sent a message through my lawyer, Sarah. It was short, simple, and to the point. "The only contact I will have with you or anyone else in your family from now on will be through my lawyer. Do not attempt to contact me again." It was my final stand, a declaration of my independence, a drawing of a line in the sand that they could not cross. The dominoes started to fall soon after that. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the very real possibility of spending the rest of their lives in prison, Mark and Melanie took a plea deal. They agreed to plead guilty to the charges against them in exchange for a reduced sentence. Mark was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Melanie, as an accomplice, was sentenced to 7 years. My father, facing similar charges, also took a plea deal. He was sentenced to 5 years of probation and ordered to pay a substantial fine. Uncle Dave, who had a prior criminal record, was also sentenced to prison time for his role in the home invasion. The family was destroyed, not by my refusal to sell my house, but by their own greed, their own arrogance, and their own criminal actions. I had won. But the victory felt hollow, a bittersweet taste of ash in my mouth. The legal battles were over. The threats were gone. My family was in prison or in exile, their power broken, their empire of lies and deceit reduced to a pile of legal documents and newspaper clippings. I was free. But freedom, I soon discovered, was not the same as healing. The physical danger had passed, but the emotional scars remained deep and painful wounds that would take a long time to heal. I was back in my home, the house that I had fought so hard to save. The physical damage from the home invasion had been repaired. The broken door replaced the shattered windows, fixed the scratches on the hardwood floors, sanded and refinished. But the house felt different. It was no longer the sanctuary it had once been. It was haunted not by ghosts, but by memories. The memory of the shattered glass, the smell of gasoline, the look in my father's eyes as he ordered me to sign over my life. The house was a constant, painful reminder of the betrayal, a monument to the family I had lost. The first few months were a period of profound and soul-crushing loneliness. The silence in the house was deafening, a stark contrast to the noise and chaos of the past few months. I was surrounded by the things I had worked so hard to acquire, the beautiful furniture, the carefully chosen artwork, the thriving garden in the backyard. But I had never felt more alone. The pain of losing my entire family was a physical ache, a constant gnawing presence in my chest. I would find myself wandering through the house at night, touching the familiar objects, a wave of grief washing over me. I missed my mother's laugh, my father's goofy jokes, Melanie's late-night phone calls. I missed the family I thought I had, the family I had always wanted. And the grief was so overwhelming that it was hard to breathe, hard to function, hard to do anything but exist. But healing, I learned, is not a single event. It's a process, a series of small, deliberate acts of self-care and self-preservation. It's a choice you make every day to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep living. I started to heal by throwing myself into my work. I threw myself into my job at the law firm, channeling my pain and my anger into my work, becoming a more focused, more efficient, more valuable employee. I started a garden in my backyard, a small, humble patch of earth that I tended with a religious devotion. I planted tomatoes and cucumbers, peppers, and zucchini, watching them grow from tiny seeds into thriving plants. It was a simple, tangible act of creation, a symbol of new growth and new life. A reminder that even in the midst of destruction, there is the possibility of rebirth. I also started to reconnect with the people who had stood by me, my true allies. Sarah and I became close friends, our bond forged in the fires of battle. We would meet for coffee or dinner, talking about everything and nothing, a welcome respite from the drama of my life. Ben, the gruff, cynical private investigator, also became a friend, a surrogate father figure, who offered gruff but heartfelt advice and a much-needed dose of reality. They were my new family, my chosen family, a small but loyal group of people who loved me for who I was not, for what I could do for them. The most important step in my healing journey, however, was the one I was most afraid to take. I started going to therapy. I was hesitant, at first skeptical of the idea of spilling my guts to a stranger. But I knew I needed help. I knew I couldn't carry this burden alone. My therapist was a kind, compassionate woman with a gentle smile and a patient, non-judgmental ear. She helped me to process the trauma, to understand the complex dynamics of my family, to untangle the web of guilt and shame and anger that had kept me trapped for so long. She helped me to see that I was not to blame for their actions, that I was not selfish for setting boundaries, that I was not a bad person for refusing to sacrifice my own life for their mistakes. It was a slow, painful process, but it was a necessary one. It was in that sterile, quiet office week after week that I finally started to heal, to reclaim my life, to find my way back to myself. Months later, long after the dust had settled and the media frenzy had died down, I received a letter. It was a plain white envelope with no return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was my mother's. She had sent it from a different address, a P.O. box in a town I had never heard of. My hands were shaking as I opened it, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to expect. Another manipulation, another guilt trip, another lie. But the letter was none of those things. It was short, simple, and heartbreaking. There were no excuses, no more manipulations, no more attempts to justify their actions. There was only one sentence written in a shaky, uncertain hand. "I'm so sorry, I chose wrong." I read the sentence over and over again, the words blurring through my tears. I felt a flicker of something, a tiny spark of empathy, a glimmer of the love I had once felt for her. But it was just a flicker. I read the letter one last time, and then I put it away in a drawer with the other mementos of my past. I didn't reply. Forgiveness, I realized, was not for them. It was for me, and I wasn't ready. I might never be ready. My closure would not come from their apology. It would come from within. Today, I stand in my living room, the morning light streaming through the windows just as it did on the day I bought this house. The house is no longer just a symbol of my financial success. It is a testament to my survival, my strength, my resilience. It is a symbol of the battles I have fought and the wars I have won. I have paid a terrible price for this house, a price measured in lost relationships, in broken trust, in a grief so profound that it almost broke me. But it is mine. It is unequivocally, undeniably mine. The lesson I learned from this whole ordeal is a simple one, but it is a lesson that has taken me a lifetime to learn. Family is not defined by blood. It is not defined by last names or shared histories. It is defined by love, by respect, by honor, by a willingness to stand by someone, not when it's easy, but when it's hard. My blood family failed that test. But my chosen family, my friends, my allies, they passed with flying colors. I look out the window at the thriving garden in my backyard, at the quiet, peaceful street, and I feel a sense of peace, a quiet, steady calm that I have never felt before. I am free. The future is unwritten, but for the first time in a long time, it is entirely beautifully my own. As I close this chapter of my life, I'm left with so many thoughts, and I'd love to hear yours. Have you ever had to set a boundary with a family member that was difficult but necessary? What did that experience teach you about the true meaning of family? Please share your stories in the comments below. Your experiences can be a source of strength and support for others who might be going through something similar. If you found this story meaningful, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more stories of resilience and healing. Sharing this video could also help someone who feels alone in their struggle. Thank you so much for listening, for being a part of my journey, and for allowing me to share my story with you. I wish you all peace, strength, and the courage to build your own sanctuary, whatever that may be.